Okay, so buckle up, everybody, because this deep dive takes us straight to the top of the world,
To the top.
Mount Everest.
Yeah.
You know when you sent in your source material excerpts from the Everest Wikipedia page?
Hmm.
I have to admit, I thought, okay, Everest, we get it, you're tall.
Right.
But then I started digging into these excerpts,
Yeah.
and let me tell you,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot more to this mountain than just its height.
Oh, there's so much more to it than just how tall it is.
It's true.
I mean, that iconic silhouette of Everest, it tends to overshadow the incredible depth, if you'll pardon the pun,
No, that pun totally works here.
of its story.
And you know what else struck me?
What's that?
The numbers.
Okay.
Like, we all know the basic stats. 8,848.86 meters above sea level, making it the highest point on Earth.
It's a big number.
But did you realize the summit ridge actually forms the border between Nepal and China?
That is true.
Talk about awkward neighbors.
Yeah, right? I mean, and highly sought after real estate, it seems. Since that first historic ascent back in 1953, over 4,000 people have summited. But over 300 haven't made it back down.
Wow.
And get this, the pace of ascents has just skyrocketed since 2000. We're talking hundreds per year, sometimes pushing close to 1,000.
See, those numbers hint at a bigger story, right?
Absolutely.
On the one hand, this incredible drive to push human limits,
Right.
but on the other, the risks, the ethical debates.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a walk in the park, even if it is the world's highest one.
No, it is not. It is a very different kind of beast. And that brings us to, I think, a fascinating point.
Okay.
While kind of the West, I guess call it Everest, the people living in its shadow, the people of Nepal and Tibet, they've always had their own names for this majestic peak. Names that are, deeply rooted in their cultures and spirituality.
And those names are even more intriguing when you consider how Everest came to be.
Right.
So fill us in. How did a mountain with such deep local significance end up with a name that, let's be honest, most of the world couldn't even pronounce until recently?
Yeah, I mean, leave it to the British and their 19th century surveying expeditions.
Of course.
Right. Imagine this, a team stationed in India because Nepal wasn't too keen on letting them in,
Right.
using these massive instruments called theodolites.
Theodolites.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of a steampunk novel.
They're these gigantic, intricate telescopes used to measure angles and distances, allowing them to survey mountains from afar. They pinpoint this peak as the tallest, and they need to name something official. They decided on Everest after Sir George Everest, the former Surveyor General of India.
The irony is he wasn't a fan of the idea.
No, he was not.
He even argued that the name wasn't pronounceable by most Indians, let alone a name that they would use for a mountain with existing local names.
Which is fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, Everest itself reflects a particular moment in history,
Mm.
a clash between cultures and approaches to knowledge, and it highlights how even something as seemingly permanent as a mountain's name can be tied to human stories and power dynamics.
It really makes you appreciate the layers of meaning here.
Yes.
Speaking of layers, let's talk about Everest from a geological perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just a single chunk of rock that magically shot up to touch the sky, right?
No, not at all. Everest is incredibly old, of course,
Yeah.
but geologically speaking, it's actually quite young.
Really?
Yeah, you see, it's part of the Himalayas, right?
Yeah.
Formed by the Indian tectonic plate, colliding with the Eurasian plate.
Right.
A slow motion crash that's been going on for 50 million years.
Wow.
But here's the cool part. Everest is a composite,
Okay.
built up over time by different rock formations being thrust together.
So it's like a geological layer cake.
It is.
Each layer telling a story of a different era, a different stage in Earth's history.
Exactly.
What kind of stories do these layers tell?
Incredible ones. Take the Komalongma Formation,
Okay.
which forms that iconic summit peak. It's primarily limestone. And get this,
What?
it contains fossilized marine creatures.
Wait, so the top of Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth, was once underwater. Now, that's an image. What a reminder that landscapes we think of as eternal are actually in constant flux over geological time.
It is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And speaking of change, remember that 2020 remeasurement of Everest?
Yes.
It wasn't a huge difference, less than a meter,
Right.
but it highlighted that those tectonic plates are still moving,
Oh,
still subtly reshaping the mountain. Even earthquakes and the immense pressure of ice and snow can cause minute changes in height.
So even something as massive as Everest is still responding to forces beneath our feet,
It is.
constantly being remade. It's humbling, isn't it, to think of all that geological drama playing out over millions of years? Makes those early attempts to climb Everest seem even more daring when you realize what forces shaped the very ground they were climbing.
Yeah, it really is. And that's a perfect segue into the human side of this Everest saga. You know those early expeditions?
Yes.
The pioneers who dared to dream of conquering this seemingly insurmountable peak?
Right.
What drove them to such extremes?
Yeah, it's a question that's always captivated me, those early climbers. I mean, what was it about Everest that made them risk everything?
It's a question that's captivated adventurers and historians alike. And I think it boils down to this fundamental human desire to push the limits of what's possible,
Right.
to explore the unknown,
Right.
to test ourselves against nature's grandest challenges.
And Everest, with its daunting height and unforgiving environment,
Yes.
that was the ultimate test.
Absolutely. Those early attempts in the 1920s, they were truly remarkable feats of courage and determination. These climbers were venturing into uncharted territory,
Yeah.
facing extreme altitudes and weather conditions that we can barely even comprehend.
You're right. I mean, imagine getting to the base of Everest back then. No fancy gear, no helicopters whisking you up to base camp.
Right.
It must have been an arduous journey just to even start.
It was. Imagine hauling, heavy woolen clothing, leather boots, basic ice axes.
Right.
They often spent months just reaching the starting point of their climb.
Wow, that's a far cry from the organized expeditions we see today.
It is.
But even with those limitations, they made incredible progress.
They did.
Tell me about some of the most notable early attempts.
Well, in 1922, a British expedition led by Charles Howard-Bury, and including the legendary George Mallory,
Okay.
made the first real attempt on the summit.
Okay.
They reached an altitude of over 8,300 meters,
Wow.
which was a world record at the time.
And they didn't quite make it to the top?
They were forced to turn back due to exhaustion and bad weather.
Right.
But their achievement was a major milestone, a testament to their courage. And it really ignited this enduring fascination with Everest's summit.
And of course, you can't talk about early Everest expeditions without mentioning the mystery of Mallory and Irvine.
Of course not.
I mean, it's a story that's captured the imagination for almost a century.
It's a true enigma. George Mallory, already an Everest veteran, and Andrew Irvine, a young and brilliant engineer, set out on June 8, 1924, for their final push to the summit. They were last spotted just a few hundred meters from the top,
Wow.
and then they vanished.
No trace, no clues. I mean, this is Everest. Surely they must have found something.
Well, for decades, their fate remained a complete mystery.
Right.
Then in 1999, an expedition discovered Mallory's body on the north face.
And Irvine? Did they make it to the top?
Irvine's body has never been found.
Oh, wow.
And the camera they were carrying, which might have held the answer, is still missing.
Oh, man.
Mallory's body showed signs of a fatal fall, but whether it happened on the way up or down, we just don't know.
So they could have been the first to summit Everest 29 years before Hillary and Tenzing.
They could have been.
But the evidence is lost in the mountain. That's incredibly fascinating and also a bit sad, isn't it?
It's a story that I think speaks to the power of this mountain, not just as a physical challenge, but as a source of endless fascination and unanswered questions. It seems Everest holds on to its secrets very tightly.
It certainly does. And even the most triumphant stories
Yeah.
are often interwoven with tragedy. Take, for instance, the first confirmed ascent in 1953.
Hillary and Tenzing, an iconic moment in mountaineering history. Edmund Hillary, a beekeeper from New Zealand, and Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa from Nepal, reached the summit on May 29, 1953.
An incredible achievement, especially considering the challenges they faced.
Absolutely.
There.
They had to contend with the same unforgiving conditions as those early expeditions, but their success marked a turning point in Everest's history.
Yeah.
I mean, it opened the floodgates, so to speak.
And not always in a good way, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we talked about the sharp increase in climbers since 2000, the rise of commercial climbing, and the ethical dilemmas that come with it.
Yeah.
It seems that this incredible human drive to conquer Everest has come with its own set of challenges.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one, right?
It is.
I mean, the increase in commercial expeditions has made Everest more accessible, but it's also sparked a really complex debate
Yeah.
about responsibility risk and, the environmental impact on this fragile ecosystem.
Yeah. It's a tricky balance for sure. I mean, on the one hand, you have this incredible human desire
Right.
to experience something truly extraordinary,
Yeah.
to push your own personal limits.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there's the very real risk of putting yourself and others in danger and potentially damaging this iconic mountain.
Absolutely. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about until it's too late.
Hmm.
And one event that really tragically highlighted these challenges, I think, was the 1996 disaster.
Right.
A harrowing day on Everest where 8 climbers lost their lives.
Yeah, the disaster that John Krakauer wrote about in Into Thin Air, I
Yes.
remember that book being both gripping and incredibly tragic.
It truly was.
Hmm.
While the tragedy was, a complex mix of factors,
Right.
including sudden storms and overcrowding, it raised serious questions about the role of commercial expeditions
Right.
and the responsibility of guides and climbers alike.
And from what I recall, overcrowding was at least partly to blame,
Right.
with multiple groups all vying for the summit on the same day,
Yeah.
leading to bottlenecks at crucial points and delaying climbers in really dangerous conditions.
Yeah, it's a very real danger.
It's a stark reminder of how, even with modern advancements,
Right.
Everest doesn't play by our rules.
No, it does not. It is a powerful reminder that Everest can be incredibly unforgiving.
Yeah.
And speaking of the human drama that unfolds on those slopes,
Yeah.
one of the most, I think, heart-wrenching stories from that day is the controversy surrounding David Sharp.
David Sharp. That name's familiar. Wasn't he a climber who was passed by multiple expeditions while in distress
He was.
and ultimately died on the mountain?
He was attempting a solo climb without supplemental oxygen,
Wow.
an incredibly risky endeavor.
Yeah.
He became ill and collapsed near the summit. And while some climbers did try to help,
Right.
others continued their ascent,
Wow.
believing that he was beyond saving.
It's a chilling reminder of the stark realities up there.
It is?
At those altitudes in the death zone,
Yeah.
where oxygen is scarce and even the simplest actions require immense effort.
It's true.
Even experienced climbers are operating on the very edge of survival up there.
Absolutely.
And I imagine the decision to help someone in distress
Yeah.
takes on a whole new meaning when your own life hangs in the balance.
You're in survival mode at that point.
Right.
And that's precisely the heart of the controversy, right?
Right.
It ignited this huge debate about climbing ethics
Of course.
and the moral dilemmas faced at extreme altitudes.
Right.
And I don't think there are any easy answers when every decision, every action carries such weight.
No, not at all. It makes you realize that Everest isn't just about physical strength and endurance.
Right.
It's about mental fortitude and moral courage as well.
Absolutely. You're really confronting yourself up there in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But, for all the focus on climbing, I was struck by some of the other lesser-known Everest facts
Okay.
that you unearthed, like Everest and aviation.
You're
Those two don't exactly seem like natural companions.
not at all.
But you'd be surprised. Even the skies above Everest have been a stage for some pretty incredible feats.
Mhm.
The first recorded flight over Everest was back in 1933.
Wow.
A British expedition led by the Marquess of Clydesdale.
Okay.
They used modified biplanes, open cockpits, basic instruments. Imagine the grit to fly over the summit and capture those first aerial photographs of the mountain.
Open cockpits at that altitude.
Can you imagine?
I can only imagine what that experience must have been like. The biting cold, the roar of the wind in your ears, the thin air,
Yeah.
making every movement a struggle. Those early aviators were pushing the very limits of human endurance, but
Absolutely.
in a different way.
They were pushing boundaries. They were redefining what was possible.
Right.
And the desire to experience Everest from a new perspective didn't stop there.
Right.
In 1991, a hot air balloon made the first successful flight over the summit.
Wow, a hot air balloon.
A hot air balloon.
Over ever.
I know, incredible.
That's amazing. And then there's Jean-Marc Bourvin,
Yes.
a French adventurer who in 1988 became the first person to paraglide off the summit.
Yes.
He launched himself off the top of the world,
Off the top of the world.
paragliding off Everest. That's a level of daring I can barely comprehend. But it speaks to this, incredible human drive to challenge ourselves.
Right.
To find new ways to experience the world,
Yeah.
even in the most extreme environments. And Everest seems to be a magnet for that kind of adventurous spirit.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Whether it's climbing, flying, skiing, even base jumping Everest seems to just attract those who crave that ultimate challenge, that ultimate adrenaline rush.
So with thousands of ascents under our belts,
Yeah.
with stories of triumph and tragedy etched into its slopes, with the impact of climate change becoming more and more evident, what does the future hold for Everest?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is.
Everest today is a complex mix of awe-inspiring beauty and the sobering realities of human impact.
Yeah, and we see that tension playing out more and more, don't we?
We do.
This tension between the desire to experience Everest's majesty
Hmm.
and the responsibility to protect it.
Absolutely.
We've talked about the environmental concerns, the overcrowding, the debates about commercialization.
Okay.
It seems like the very things that draw us to Everest
Hmm.
also have the potential to harm it.
They do. It's a very delicate balance, and there are efforts to address these challenges, of course.
Right.
Stricter permit regulations initiatives to clean up the mountain.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think the future of Everest really lies in the hands of those who venture onto its slopes and those who appreciate it from afar.
It's a reminder that Everest is more than just a mountain.
It's so much more.
It's a symbol of human ambition,
Yes.
of our drive to explore and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a fragile ecosystem,
Yes.
a place of immense beauty and power that deserves our respect and protection.
It really does. Well said.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into Mount Everest.
I think that's a good place to stop.
Hopefully you, the listener, come away not just with a head full of facts,
Right.
but also with a sense of awe, a touch of curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even a desire to learn more about this majestic and complex mountain.
Such a fascinating place.
Until next time, keep exploring.